Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session on studying in Germany. I am Hami from Rosedale Global High School, and today I'll be the moderator for this session. Here we have with us John Paul Kleiner, who is the Senior Manager of University Relations with the DAD Information Point Toronto, and he is representing study in Germany. The organization supports German universities' efforts to internationalize, and it is the world's largest provider of individual mobility funding for academics. For this session, John Paul is going to start with a quick presentation, and throughout the presentation, you're welcome to put in comments in the chat, interact with the content, or if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A section. The Q&A section is moderated, so what that means is that once you post a question, you might not see it come up right away because it needs to be screened, and we will have the Q&A sort of appear at the end after the presentation. All right, and over to you, John Paul.
Thanks. Thanks very much for that introduction. Thank you to all of you who've taken the time to join me here today. I'm just going to share my screen here. Give me a brief moment. Fantastic. I hope everyone can see that. So yes, I will be addressing the topic today of accessing bachelor studies in Germany with the OSSD. So just that will be the primary focus of this presentation, but I'm going to take this opportunity to give a little bit more context and information that I think should be useful to you and the students you advise. It's exciting for me to speak with guidance counselors. You are the multipliers of this information, and I was really pleased when Rosedale reached out to us to see if we were interested in taking part here. I think that your students represent a group that has very real possibilities in many cases of realizing bachelor studies in Germany. So hopefully we can work together on this and make that something that fits into their academic career path. So in our brief time here together today, I'm going to introduce you to the organization that I work for just a little bit, give you a sense of who we are, what we do, why we do it, and speak a little bit about what motivates students to go to Germany. You'll probably know some of this material, some of it maybe not. I'm hoping to sort of give you a fuller picture as to why Germany has emerged as the most popular destination for international students going to a non-English speaking country, and that's a relatively new development. We can talk about that if you wish. Then we'll talk specifically about the bachelor degree issues, some general information orientation on that level of study, the entrance requirements, obviously, that'll be a key part of this presentation, and then some tools for helping your students find programs of interest, some information on how to apply, and then I'll introduce the Study in Germany web portal. I've managed to leave the L off there, and for that I apologize. And then you'll have some contact information for me if you wish to reach out after this event. So in brief, DAD is the German acronym for Deutscher Akademischer Austauschdienst, which stands for German Academic Exchange Service. And we were founded nearly 100 years ago in the wake of World War I in 1925. Interestingly, DAD was founded at the motivation of a number of German students, university students, specifically from the University of Heidelberg. These students had some informal connections to the United States and wanted to go to America to do some of their studies, and there were no pathways in place at the time. And so they took this to their university president, who then carried this to a number of other institutions in Germany, and out of that grew DAD. So we were very much grassroots, grew from the bottom up in many ways. And that ethos continues to exist, although we're quite a large organization. As was mentioned at the outset, we are primarily a funding organization. So our mandate is really to help German universities connect with their counterparts around the world. And we do that by offering a suite of scholarship and grant programs to students and faculty at universities around the world. So if they want to go to Germany for study or research, or in some case internship purposes, they can typically apply to DAD for support. And then there are, of course, programs for scholars based in Germany to go abroad. So the idea is to create these sort of academic bridges. But the other very important part of our work at DAD, and certainly my work here in Toronto with the Information Point, is to give information and counseling more generally on opportunities for study and research in Germany. So similar to what I'm doing here today. In terms of the scope of our enterprise, our activities, we have offices in more than 60 countries around the world. I'm connected to what they call the North American Regional Office, which brings together the US and Canada. Our regional office is based in New York. We have another office similar to mine in San Francisco, but I'm responsible for basically liaising with Canadian students and faculty. We supported over 135,000 scholars in 2021, so under programs we administer. And that, of course, was a pandemic year. In normal years, it's closer to 150,000 individuals. And our funding, we're overwhelmingly publicly funded. We get it from two federal ministries in Germany, the Ministry of Education and Research, as one might expect, but also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In fact, they are the largest supporter of DAD financially. And that gives you some sense of how our work is viewed in Germany. Obviously, there is a clear study and research component central to what we do. We're an academically focused organization, but that the Foreign Office supports us gives a sense or a clear indication of our role as sort of soft diplomacy, soft diplomats. So we are there to build bridges between Germany and the world. We're part of those efforts. So that's who we are. In terms of why Germany, so your students will have various reasons. It's not unusual in my experience to hear parents who've had an experience in Germany, working or studying there, who are enthused by what they saw and experienced in Germany and want their children to have that. That's all fine and good. Often what they have seen is, certainly if they studied there, was the very high academic standards at German universities. It's one of the world's oldest university systems, a well-earned reputation for quality, and that is certainly the case. What is lesser known is the quality of student life there. So student life in Germany is subsidized in ways that's, if not unique, unusual in the world. So it's a good value proposition, and students tend to have a comfortable lifestyle. So that means things like transit are subsidized for students to a great extent. Many universities charge what they call a semester fee, which includes access to an unlimited regional transit pass. There are subsidized cafeterias offering high quality food at all German universities, so students can get good quality, warm meals at very reasonable prices. And then many cultural events in Germany are highly subsidized for students and young people to access, so that students can have a well-rounded experience. I was saying before to Hamai that often my conversations with students and their parents around doing a bachelor degree in Germany start with the question, is it true that there's no tuition in Germany? And I can say that with an asterisk, yes, this is the case. Germany's public universities offer a great many tuition-free study programs. If tuition is charged, if there are study fees charged, these tend to be significantly lower than what we would pay here in Canada and even in the United States. So that's important to know. And in the vast majority of cases, there is no differentiated fee structure. That is, an international student coming to Germany will pay the same fees or no fees, just like the domestic German student or an EU passport holder. So we don't have this tiered system that is certainly very familiar to those of us here in Canada and perhaps in the US and other jurisdictions. So that's a driver for interest. And as I mentioned at the outset, I mean, Germany has emerged as the fourth most popular destination for international students. This is a new development within the last 10 or 15 years, certainly, or even more recently. Why is that? That is through the preponderance of English language studies, but as we will discuss, that focus is very much at the graduate level, not at the bachelor level. Still, there are opportunities there. Other motivating factors or important things to know about why Germany is an interesting destination for a bachelor degree or degree generally is that its research infrastructure is very good. They place a real emphasis on R&D activity. Much of that work is based at universities, and students who are pursuing relevant fields have access to those facilities. So that can be interesting and exciting. It's also, as you can probably imagine, because it's the fourth most popular destination in the world, a highly international setting. German universities, on average, have 15% of their student population from outside the country. Why is that important? Well, it's reassuring for students and their parents often to know that they won't be alone. I can say, as someone who's old enough to have gone back in the day, those structures weren't there when I was at university. German universities were not unwelcoming to international students, but they certainly weren't set up to accommodate, integrate, acculturate those students. And in the vast majority of the cases now, German universities have staff and structures and programs in place to help their international students integrate into their student life and make that transition. So that's an important thing to note. The context of university studies has changed for international students and for the better. And as I mentioned, there's this great many of English language programs. At present, I think there's nearly 2,000 what they call international study programs, which is sort of a term that they use to describe English language degree programs that are designed in part to attract international students. So that's, some of the case for why Germany. So some general information. So the standard length for a German bachelor program is 3 years or 6 semesters. So this is part of the standardization of the European education area that took place in the Bologna process a number of years ago. So Germany now has a system which looks fairly similar to what we have here in North America, with the exception being that the bachelor degrees tend to run 3 years in length as opposed to 4, which I would say is the standard, certainly here in Canada and the US. The first hurdle that many of your students would discover is that while there are English language study programs at the bachelor level, they are between 2 and 3% of the total program offerings. They are rare. Overwhelmingly, bachelor education is designed for the domestic students, and that means it's taught in German. So international students are certainly welcome into the German language programs, but they would, of course, have to demonstrate the necessary level of German language ability, typically at the time they apply, although there are some programs which are flexible there. That is, the student can commit to reaching that level and demonstrate that between the time they apply and when they arrive. Education in Germany is a federal responsibility, which means that each of the 16 German states administer studies in their state. And that means you have a patchwork quilt of requirements and approaches. And individual institutions and study programs have a great flexibility. So there are minimum standards that have been set nationally, and that's what I'll be discussing here today, is what the minimum that your students would need to have on their OSSD transcript to even come into question. But there can be requirements over and above that are connected to individual study programs. And so for German language specifically, different universities, different programs require different language certificates and proof. So I can say, generally speaking, for a German language study program, the applicant will need to have reached the European language standard of C1, which is advanced, or B2. There are programs that will take B2 students, but typically C1 for degree studies is required. And how that language knowledge is demonstrated varies by program. So the program offices for these degrees can obviously communicate that specifically. There are opportunities here in Canada, limited, opportunities, but there are opportunities for students to do accredited tests here, so that they have that in their pocket and can show that at the time of application. It's also not uncommon for students to prepare here and go to Germany to write those language exams. But typically, for instance, I would imagine some of your schools offer German. It would be unusual for high school level German to satisfy the requirements even after grade 12, the minimum requirements. So typically students would have to go over and above that down other avenues. And the transcript alone, a grade 12 German mark, even in the 90s, mid 90s, wouldn't suffice as demonstration of the necessary language level. They would have to write one of these accredited exams, and that's information you would get from the university itself. I can point you in the direction, certainly here in Canada, as to where the testing can take place, but it is limited, but it does exist. So that's sort of a general overview, some facts. On to the admission requirements. You probably saw this all on the page for this session. So these are taken from the Anabine database. So this is a database that is administered and put together by the German states themselves, and basically gathers the requirements for students from around the world, the minimum requirements for them to be considered for, among other things, bachelor studies in Germany. So for OSSD students, what do they need to have? Well, where most Canadian students, or most students doing the Canadian diploma, fail, certainly here in Canada proper, is with the languages. Germany has an academic stream high school system, the Gymnasium, which is academically rigorous and has less wiggle room for students in terms of their course choices than is the case here, certainly in Ontario. And so Gymnasium graduates have at least 2 languages up to the grade 12 level. So same has to hold for international students. So in the case of students doing the OSSD, they will of course have English to grade 12, but they need a second language up to grade 12. In most cases that would be French, but any other language up to the grade 12 level is acceptable. So English and French is a fine combination, as would be English and any other second language. So there, language, that's the minimum requirements. In terms of mathematics, algebra, they need to have advanced functions and calculus and vectors on the transcript. So they need to do those 2 specific math-related courses. They need to do 1 of the natural sciences to the grade 12 level. So that would be chemistry, physics, or biology, any one of those. And then 2 additional subjects at the grade 12 level. So those are the minimum requirements. There need to be 6 UPCs in the grade 12 year. So these university prep courses, so the advanced level. And then they need to have a minimum average of 65%. And that is really exceptionally low, obviously. In many cases, they would have to have an average well above that. I can't speak to the specific entrance requirements for programs, but it's not dissimilar to what we have here in Canada, where certain institutions, certain study programs have very, very high minimum requirements, whereas others have lower grade point average needed. So there is a whole spectrum inside Germany that way. I would say the quality is generally very good. It's a narrower spectrum in terms of the quality from one institution to another. Generally speaking, very, very high quality of instruction and education there, but there are differentiation, or is differentiation within the system. So students have different points of entry. So those are the minimum requirements. I imagine we'll come back to that in the questions, but if not. Then there's a second pathway, and this is less relevant for you, but something that you can point out to your students. So it's not unusual, as I say, for students to graduate from Canadian high school programs and not be eligible for direct entry. So in the case where they have some of the required courses, but are needing to fill in some gaps, There are preparatory programs offered called Studienkolleg. So these are really very much aimed at international students who want to come into the system, but who do not fulfill the minimum requirements. And once again, there's no standard practice here. These Studienkollegs, the structure and the arrangements for these vary by state and sometimes by institution. So really the best, if you have a student who's in this boat who doesn't meet the minimum requirements, academic requirements, but once, is driven to do this bachelor program, then the key way forward is to identify the specific study programs of interest and to contact them about their pathway programs, their prep programs. They will be able to tell the student exactly which programs are open to them and how they can gain entry. And those programs work in varying ways. Some of them are really very much wedded to specific degree programs where the arrangement is if the student does the preparatory program, and these typically run a year in length, then they pass, then they're guaranteed entry into the bachelor program. There are other programs where the student has no guarantee of admission even if they pass. So passing simply means that you're qualified to apply. But again, that's information that students can get from the study programs themselves. And these programs are designed specifically to prepare students for specific fields of study or for specific study programs. So the idea is to fill in those blanks. I will say sometimes parents blanch at this idea. It will very much depend on the individual student, but the German academic culture and certainly the Canadian academic cultures differ significantly. And so a preparatory year for a student who's not familiar with the German system, who hasn't lived abroad previously, this can be a really positive personal growth experience and prepare them to succeed at the bachelor level. And they are not prohibitively expensive. English language Studienkollegs typically have fees associated with them, but again, they're relatively low. German language Studienkollegs are often or typically free of charge, tuition free. So depends which pathway the student's looking into, but this is another avenue into the system. I've mentioned several times finding study programs, and there are two primary sources for this information, and I would encourage you to pass both of these on to your students. So the first is a study program database that's found on the Study in Germany web portal. So this is the campaign that I work as part of in my DAD job. We're promoting, as the name suggests, Study in Germany. This portal is designed for international students looking to do a degree in Germany, and it really addresses all aspects of going to Germany for a study stay. So both the academic and the logistic. So it's a really great point of orientation for students interested in this subject. And it features at its heart a program database with, I believe, over 20,000 degree programs in there. It's searchable. You can narrow things down by any number of criteria, keywords, locations, language of instruction, and very quickly get an overview of what programs exist. And all the matches generated by a search are linked directly to the university program pages where students can get the detailed information on how to apply, the application window, the requirements, and then, of course, contact information to follow up with the questions that they will most certainly have. The second database, similar but different in significant ways, is My Guide. This too captures descriptions of study programs. The difference here is that students create a profile and similar search function. Difference being because they have a profile and they're logged in, they can save their searches and they can go back and forth. The other key difference here is that they can communicate directly with the study programs of interest to them inside the app. So with Study in Germany, it's a web-based system. Each session would have to be started anew. Contact information, you have to save the email address, all that sort of thing. My Guide, it's all held inside the system. So that can be convenient, certainly. Both these databases, they're not identical. They're largely the same, but it's worth searching both because there are programs in one that are not found in the other. So it's worth the extra effort to spend time in both databases. So that's finding a study program. In terms of, how do I decide? So this is frequently a question that we get. Understandably, international students are often not familiar with the German institutions. They have multiple options. They don't know which way to go. So number one, I would suggest is to speak to scholars teaching in your field of interest at universities in your home country or here in Canada. There are hundreds of German expats teaching, certainly in the Canadian university system, virtually across the disciplinary spectrum. If you go into the faculty descriptions, a student and their parents go in, they'll very quickly identify, looking at the academic CVs of these people, who studied in Germany, who has research stays there, who has connections, and simply approaching those people with your, CV and expression of your interest in studying. I think you'll find that many of them are willing to help orient you and give you some perspective on what the options are. So that takes effort, but I think it's time well spent. There are, of course, formal ranking systems. The most popular, best known of these in Germany is the CHE ranking system, and the DED Germany website includes the CHE rankings, the most recent ones, across a variety of programs. So you can get some sense as to that. I think as an information point, it's valuable to see. But I would encourage people to go beyond simply using the rankings as their point of reference or the motivating factor for decisions. I think that it's good if you get more input. So that's finding a study program. In terms of the timeline for your students, again, there's no standard application window, sadly. But generally speaking, programs begin accepting applications sometime after mid-March. And in some cases, those application windows remain open to about mid-July. And you can expect anywhere between 1 month to 2 months for the adjudication period. So you would typically know later than you would certainly know if you were attending a Canadian university. This is driven in part because German semester runs differently. It doesn't start until mid-October in most cases. So students, it's not unusual to hear in August, even into early September, depending on when you applied, as to whether you're in or not. So that can be a cause of anxiety and concern, understandably, but that's the timeline and the way the system works. It is advisable to apply early. In terms of how you apply, there are two pathways. You would in some cases be applying directly to the German university or to the program office for the degree that's of interest. But most German universities and study programs work with an organization called Uni Assist. And as the name suggests, their job is to help the universities process applications from international students. So their job is really to do the first level of vetting of international student applications, and then they pass on all of those that meet the minimum requirements as set by the university. So UniSist is actually, for international students, a great tool. If you apply early enough, UniAssist's job is very much to work with the applicants to make sure that they provide the necessary documentation. It's not unusual for there to be some lack of clarity around this. And so if an applicant, a student, applies well enough in advance, UniAssist will get back to them and say, this is what you're missing, or what you submitted here isn't exactly what we need this. So if you give UniAssist a chance to do their job, that would be by applying early, they will be a good partner for your students in helping them make sure their application is complete and prepared. This is often a question that students ask. Those familiar with the German academic system know that they have a different grading system. This is the so-called modified Bavarian formula that is used to determine international student grades. I'm not going to begin to explain this, but in the events that your students ask, how will my grades be converted to the German system? The answer is based on this. And those of them who have done the advanced vectors or the calculus may in fact be able to decipher this and apply it. I'm afraid, as a historian by training, that would be beyond me. I mentioned the Study in Germany portal. Again, I'd like to emphasize what a useful tool this can be for you and your work, but also to give to the students who have an interest in this. It really does give good information on student life in Germany, those aspects around things like housing, am I able to work, cell phone plans, German student life generally. So it gives a bit of orientation and insight into what student life in Germany is like, but then it has this information on the academic side of things, including specific program pages for specific fields or areas of study. So there are things around medical studies in Germany. That's a very popular subject, but also medical related fields. So it's a great tool. You can see the URL here. If you'd like to stay in touch or like to have my information on hand, this is me. This QR code will send me an email asking for this presentation, and I'd be happy to send it to any of you who would like to have it. You can also just write to me anytime with your questions. We're on Facebook and Twitter. And if you'd like to stay in the loop about sort of regular developments with DAD, we have a monthly newsletter that you can access. If you'd like to subscribe, we just had a revamp of our website, and the subscription tool, I am reminded, is not working well. So just send me an email. Let me know you'd like to be on that. And once a month, I will shoot you our newsletter with all the latest. But that is it. I talked for quite some time, but I hope we have opportunity for questions now.
Thank you very much, John Paul. That was really helpful. And judging from the comments, the questions that we're getting here, I'm sure our counselors found it super useful as well. So I'm going to start with the first question that we got here from Bill in China. He wants to know, will Chinese be an acceptable language course for a Chinese student?
So it would need to be on the OSSD transcript. So we run into this all the time in Canada, very multicultural country where students often speak 2, 3 additional languages beyond their English, their school language. That second language needs to be on the transcript. So as long as they have English or French plus another language, the Chinese should suffice. That's something you can check with the program offices, but I can't see that being an issue.
Thank you. We have a question in the comments. It's in German, so I'm not going to attempt to read it out.
All right.
Are you able to see it?
Just a second here. I have to open the window. There we go. I have a question. Whether Chinese students... Yes, it's the same question. Okay. So whether... Yeah, I'll answer in German in the event that it's useful for Frau Wang. Ja, wenn die Schüler bis zur 12. Klasse Chinesisch auf dem Transkript haben, dann müsste das ausreichen. Die werden bestimmt auch Englisch haben. Wenn sie die 2 Sprachen bis zur 12. Klasse durchgeführt haben, müsste das die Voraussetzungen erfüllt haben. Aber ich würde sagen, am besten wendet sich der Student, beispielsweise die Studentin, an das Büro, das Verwaltungsbüro für das Studienprogramm. Die werden Bescheid geben können. Okay.
Thank you. So can I just confirm that this was the same question as before, but just in German? Right. That's exactly. Wonderful. And we have another question from Esther here. She wants to know if students have to take any admissions tests.
So generally speaking, no, provided they fulfill the requirements, these minimum requirements. There are obviously in certain fields, so we're talking things like medical studies, there are exams, but for standard bachelor programs at German universities, there are typically not entrance exams required. The gymnasium system is seen to be rigorous enough to do that.
Thank you. We have another question in German. I think for the benefit of the rest of us, if you don't mind translating this, John Paul, and answering in English, that'd be great. Because I feel like this is a
Thank
new
you.
question.
And do the students have to do test DAF 16 as well? So that's a specific German language certification, test DAF. As I mentioned in the presentation, there are a number of these language certificates that students can acquire to demonstrate their German ability. Test DAF is one of them. The requirements vary by program and university. So in some cases, the test DAF, depending on the level, can satisfy that language as language proof, but there are others that have other tests that they prefer, that they require. So the only way to know which language certificate the student needs is to contact the study program office directly. They will be able to tell you. Some of them are flexible. We'll take different ones. As I say, there's a spectrum of these, but some of them have specific requirements. So they need the test AS, for instance, something like that. It's differentiated and sadly complicated, but the answers are there at the study offices, the program offices for the degree.
Thank you. We don't have any questions in the comments in the Q&A at the moment, but I did have one myself. So it was really interesting to hear you talk about the two different ways of applying to university in Germany, either directly to the university or through Uni Assist. So I was just wondering if there are any major differences in processing times between the two methods. And it seems like applying through Uni Assist is the way to go if they have enough time, because it seems like students will get a lot more assistance by using Uni Assist.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's Uni Assist. If you give them that run-up time, that lead time, that allows them to do their job. So yes, I think for international students, when you see that, there are costs associated with applying to Uni Assist, but I would suggest they're not particularly onerous. I can't off the top of my head say what they are, but I think it's like around 75 euros for the first one, and then an additional 25 for every additional study program. So it's not dramatic in terms of its cost, and the support that they give, if you give them the time to do it, is considerable. So yes, in terms of the processing times, that will vary. I mean, it really, Uni Assist, they have their deadlines. They're in advance of what the schools need. So I think programs that are affiliated with Uni Assist tend to have slightly earlier submission requirements to allow them to do their work. It's hard to say. I think that it really comes down to sort of internal organization. So I can see there are certainly cases, if you are applying directly to a German study program, you could reasonably expect the turnaround time to be less than with Uni Assist, because there's one layer absent. But it's impossible to generalize. That is information too that you can contact the study programs. They are frequently able to tell students in a general sense. Typically, our applicants know by the end of July. So you can at least have some general point of orientation when you apply, when I will know. I think it's wise for students to cast the net wide, apply at more than one school, and then you can perhaps get a sense of what the landscape looks like.
Yeah, of course. We always tell our students to, of course, cast their nets wide and start early. Exactly. So hopefully they'll listen to us.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing is, I'm sure it's not different in other settings, but the German systems, the deadlines are the deadlines. There's very little wiggle room. So it's important that the applicants get their materials in on time and complete. Often the institutions and the systems aren't able to accommodate, even if they wanted to, latecomers. So There are exceptions, with individual documents and da 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 da. But by and large, you really have to be on time. So the German sort of stereotype of punctuality and order is in play here.
Perfect. We are almost coming to the end of the session. We have time for one last question if anyone would like to post it. All right. Otherwise, well, thank you very much, John Paul, for today's presentation. This has been extremely informative and helpful, and given the increasing interest that we're seeing among our students in studying in Germany, I hope that we'll be able to get in touch a lot more often. And of course, to the counselors watching this session, it is recorded and will be made available for a short period of time after the forum. So if you ever want to rewatch it, or if you have any colleagues who couldn't catch it today, they can always log on after the forum has ended to review the sessions. And John Paul, thank you very much, and for your time today and for presenting to our counselors. And we hope you will enjoy the rest of the forum.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity. Thanks to all of you for your interest.